Today I'm going to be tier ranking the 30 plus horror books I read in 2024. The last video I did was tier ranking all of the mystery and thriller books I read this year. Today we're talking horror books. I did update the tiers a little bit and I learned how to not crop out the titles of the books. So thank you to that commenter who reminded me of that in the last video. But you know how this works, so let's just jump on in. I'm just going to go in the order that these showed up on the list. So starting with The Night Guest. For me, this book was not very memorable. I did like the concept of it. It is a shorter novella. I liked the beginning of it. It's about this woman who realizes by wearing a step tracker that she's walking upwards of 40,000 steps in the middle of the night, and she's trying to understand what's happening to her. It just didn't pack the punch that I was hoping it to. I also listened to this one on audiobook all in one sitting, and it felt like it almost just went in one ear and out the other. I don't feel like this stayed with me very much, which was a bummer because I thought it sounded great. Horror movie by Paul Tremblay. I really adore Paul Tremblay. I love his stuff. This book in particular, I gave a 4-star. I'm gonna say it was really great. I will say if you're not a Paul Tremblay fan, well, obviously if you're not a Paul Tremblay fan, you're probably not gonna like the book. But if you're a Paul Tremblay fan, but you don't like the more artsy, ambiguous, less in your face horror stuff that he does, which is most of what he does, which I love. Anyway, I could see why people don't love this book because it's just different. It's just different. Paul Tremblay is doing some different stuff. I really like it. I read that for my friend Elizabeth's book club sometime in 2024. I have no idea what month that was, but we do have a book club discussion of that book on her channel. So if you want to hear my full thoughts about that, you can go check that out. We Used to Live Here. I really thought this was great, and I'm gonna say it's the best of all time. That's also a book I read for a book club. That was for Gabby's book club. So there's a discussion on that I'll have linked below as well. That book was just weird. It was just weird. You could really get lost in that book. You could get lost in the Reddit threads about that book. It's kind of like a beginner's version of House of Leaves. If you've been interested in House of Leaves, but you are too intimidated to read that, start here. This is much more accessible and it has a lot of the same flavors as House of Leaves. The Ballad of Black Tom, I think this might have been, was this for the 24-hour horror-a-thon at one point? I think it was one of my 24-hour horror-a-thon buddy reads. I don't really remember it. It was more cosmic, and cosmic horror kind of goes in my brain and it goes right out. I get lost in it while I'm reading it and then it gets lost in my brain. The Black Maybe. This was a short story collection that I read. It's a book I picked up from a local indie bookstore while I was on vacation, and it was a staff recommendation. I just like to pick those up when I'm traveling and visiting bookstores. The author, I believe, is Hungarian, and the stories had two very different tones. They were either very strange and almost like just a list of stranger and stranger things happening, or they were very rural feeling, and like farmland tended to be a big portion of it. There's some stories that stuck with me and some things that I found really interesting in that collection. I actually ended up not even fully finishing it. I skipped a couple stories. I'm gonna say this one also kind of falls in this not memorable, not great category for me. It just doesn't really stand out. Hurricane Season was one of my 24-hour horror-a-thon buddy reads, and I'm gonna say this one was okay, good, fine. I gave it a 3.5. It's a very interesting concept. It's not the most straightforward story structure. You kind of start to understand the story one chapter at a time from different zoom-ins on different characters and what's going on in their life. That gives you this full picture of what's going on in the town. It was very gruesome. This is a very dark book. I have been shifting to a lighter reading mood as of the last 6 months or so. This is definitely not a book I would want to read right now because it's so dark and so heavy, but it was good. Your Shadow Half Remains. This one also was not very memorable for me. This was another shorter one. So far we've got 3 novellas and a short story collection in this category. I'm seeming kind of dumb. Like I feel like I'm looking so dumb of not being able to remember any of these books I read. This was not the case for the mystery thriller category. This is definitely unique to the horror I was reading this year. I don't know why. I don't know why, but maybe it's because I've been in a lighter headspace and I just haven't wanted to like cling on to the dark stuff. I don't know. But that was a story that sounded interesting to me, and I just don't remember it. I really don't remember it at all. I just looked back at my rating and I gave it a 2.5, and I just said it was okay. So I was very neutral about it even when I read it, and it has not stuck around in my brain. Incidents Around the House. This one I actively disliked. I actively disliked. And I've been very confused all year because so many people are loving this. I feel like this is going to be on everyone's top 10 of the year list. This book has gotten so much buzz and I simply don't understand. I simply don't understand, and that's okay. That's okay. I will say there is a scene in a bathroom that does stick in my memory from this book in particular as being like creepy and well written, but the book in general and the direction it went, I just didn't love. Also, it's the POV of a child. Didn't love that. I like Josh Malerman when he's more metaphorical. And while there is a metaphor to be seen in this book, it is also very supernatural. And that's just not my favorite thing. And overall, I just didn't love it. Good Girls Don't Die. I hated this. I really disliked that. That was also a book that I read for a book club earlier in the year. I'll have all my book clubs linked down below for all these books that happen to be book club picks. This story is told from the perspective of 3 different women, and it's got an interesting concept because all of these women wake up and their lives don't feel like their own anymore. And I find that to be an interesting concept. I think the structure of this book failed this book because you read this whole woman's perspective start to end, and then you read another start to end, and then you read another start to end, and then it starts to feel repetitive. Whereas if they would have just been woven in with each other, that would have helped it a lot, I think. But yeah, I didn't like it. I also have never liked a Christina Henry book. I don't think her writing is for me, and I learned that with that one. Disappearance at Devil's Rock. I thought this one was really great, and now we have 2 Paul Tremblays side by side in this category. Can you tell I'm a Paul Tremblay fan? This is a story where this boy goes missing and the mom and the sister are trying to piece together what happened to him. You're learning what happened through journal entries, and so it is a slower paced story and more of a mystery, or it feels more like a mystery, but it does have that element that Paul Tremblay usually has of making you question, is this going to be paranormal or is there going to be a real world explanation? And I just loved it. It's more classic feeling. It kind of feels like a Stephen King in a way. I would say this is Paul Tremblay's least risky work. From what I've read from him, it's just very conventional storytelling. And so I think it'd be a great intro to Paul Tremblay if you've been interested in exploring his writing style, but some of the concepts sound a little less your vibe of his other books, then I think that's a really good place to start. I think I might have read My Husband for a book club as well. I can't fully remember. I think I might have. If I have, it'll be linked down below. This one, I would say I actively disliked. I really wanted to like it. I liked the concept of it. It's this woman who is constantly thinking about her husband. It's very stream of consciousness. It just was too slow for me to pull off what it wanted to pull off, and for me to be as invested in it. I just didn't love it. Craft stories I wrote for the devil. I'm gonna put this one in this category. It's leaning more on the not great side. I do remember it. It just wasn't great. There were moments that were great. There were things about it that I really loved. This is a short story collection, and the setup of it is about this woman who met the devil at a Halloween party, and so then she's been writing to the devil all this time since, and so it's this different collection of short stories that are like kind of connected but not fully connected. And there were some moments that were very strong and some interesting and unique structures of stories that I really liked. There was one story that was told entirely in the form of critique letters, like in a creative writing workshop, which I thought was really clever. There was a story about a woman being haunted by a future version of her daughter. There were just some really good things, but it didn't all come together for me. I would definitely read from the author again. That one just didn't fully work for me. The eyes are the best part. I thought this was okay, good, fine. I know a lot of people loved it this year. I just thought it was okay. The concept of this is an 18-year-old girl kind of starts to spiral and become obsessed with eyeballs after her mom starts dating a new guy. Relatable. Not the obsession with the eyeball part, but you know, just the turmoil of being an 18-year-old girl and seeing your parents be with someone new. Get it, yeah. So I liked it in that sense and how the character was portrayed, but the story was just a little on the nose for me, I guess. I don't know, I just wasn't as into it as a lot of other people were. Hot Sweet Home. This one I'm kind of between not great and actively disliked. I feel like I should put it in actively disliked because I liked the setup of that in the first half. The second half, I actively was disliking where it was going. This is another novella. I read a lot of horror novellas this year out of the horror that I was reading. And it's about this woman who's taking on this job to work for this reality television show that is half home renovation, half ghost haunting type of show, and she has to stage the hauntings so that the owners of the house get scared and think their house is haunted. Very fun concept. Liked the setup. Didn't love the second half of the story and what it did. It just felt very soft and strange, and I just actively disliked it. Diavola. Will we ever know? I'm not sure, but best of all time for me. Love that. Love that, love that, love that. It's a story where this family is taking this vacation together and your main character is the black sheep of the family. And it's really a story about being around a toxic family and that all too terrifying feeling of your entire life falling apart and you not having any control over it. And I loved it so much. I think it was great. It's not the most horror of the list in terms of what you might typically think, but for those things, I really loved it and I thought it was great. Coup de grace, this one, I'm gonna have to say actively disliked. It was a novella that had an interesting concept about this man getting stuck in this labyrinth, basically. He's on the subway station and then he gets off and he's suddenly in this liminal space pretty much. And he has to take all this time to re-examine his thoughts about life. It had a cool concept. It had some moments of good writing, but altogether the story was just a maze and the ending did something cool, but it wasn't worth it. Like it wasn't worth the read to get to that point. So didn't love it. Thirst, I'm gonna say it was okay, good, fine. I gave this one a 3.5 and the review that I wrote about it in my reading tracker, I feel like really sums up everything I thought about that book. I ended up writing a lot about it in my notes. I think this was pitched as some kind of lesbian vampire story, I believe. And so the structure of it really surprised me when I read it because, and I'm going to be referencing my notes now too so I remember correctly, but it starts with 8 chapters where you're following this female vampire just romping around, quenching her thirst, navigating hunting on her own after her master is killed. And there's a lot of erotic moments with people. And I don't remember how much the synopsis gives away, so I don't want to fully like say what happens, but that's part 1 is like you're getting to know this vampire. And then part 2 is a long time later in history, and then you're following the ancestor of one of the women who got close to the vampire in part 1. And then the way part 2 unfolds, you feel that vampire lurking through the story. So the structure choice was interesting in the way that was set up, but before I went into the book, I thought there would be like more back and forth of then and the now interspersed, or I don't know, I was just expecting something a little bit different. The way this book ends up feeling though, I really was in it. It was so atmospheric. It was reminiscent of Dracula. It's filled with a lot of grief and sopping with gothic atmosphere. It feels like watching a rainy gothic ASMR video. So that moodiness really worked for me and I was very in the story when I was, but cohesively the story didn't come together all the way for me and I felt like the structure wasn't the best for like the entertainment value of it. So I really liked the book, I appreciated it. I can't say it was really great for me, but it was good. It was good and I liked it and I would definitely read from this author again. Natural Beauty. I'm gonna have to put this in not memorable for me. I know a lot of people love this book and I did read it twice because after I finished it, I felt like I had missed something. I did not understand why it was so beloved and what I was missing, so I tried it again. I think I did like the audio the first time and then I did the ebook and I kind of flipped through and skim read through it the second time. I just didn't get it. And I went back and read my notes where I talked about what happened in this book and I was shocked to be reading what happened in that book because I did not remember it going in that direction. It's a story about the beauty industry. Beauty horror has been so popular recently. I don't know that I've loved any of them. I think the closest I've gotten is the Mona Awad Rouge that she wrote. I've already loved Mona Awad's writing before though, so I was a little like set up to enjoy it. Otherwise, I'm just not loving the beauty horror. So I'm not like gravitating towards it. It's not the first thing I'm picking up. I like the idea of exploring that and I especially like the idea of what this one was exploring and the like racial cleansing angle to it as well, but I don't know, it just wasn't as effective for me. Among the Living I thought was okay. It was a little bit outside of my comfort zone. I think the timing that I read that worked out for me to enjoy it more because it's a cold wintry book. I read it in the winter. It reminded me of a show I had recently watched and loved at the time. So I thought it was okay for what it was, but not a favorite for me. The Haunting of Velkwood, this one unfortunately is not super memorable for me. It had a really haunting feeling to it. It's about this haunted town where one day time just stopped or something and then they're doing some like experiments trying to get back into the town. But the whole thing just felt kind of hazy for me and it feels hazy in my memory still. Rest Stop, I really enjoyed. I'm gonna say it was really great. I did give it a 5-star, but it just doesn't feel like best of all time material. It is a survival novella about a guy who stops at a rest stop and then his life is in danger. And it is gory and it is gruesome and it's a little bit silly and I had a lot of fun with it. Chlorine, I feel like I'm gonna say that one's really great as well. This is a coming of age sapphic body horror story about this young woman woman who is convinced that she is a mermaid, and it has one of the most memorable scenes in a horror book that I've read for me that really stays in my brain when I think of it. Really beautiful writing. I believe I gave it a 4-star. It didn't quite get a 5-star for me, but I would really like to read from that author again. Bury Your Gaze. This one, I might have given it a 3-star when I read it, but I don't know. I don't think it was great for me. I felt that way about both of the most recent Chuck Tingle books. I don't know. They're just not great for me. This Wretched Valley, I really disliked. Really disliked that book. That was also a book club book that I read this year. It seems like I was only picking horror up if it was a novella or if I was reading it for a book club this year. But that's a survival story, so you would think I would like it, but I really, really did not. Bloom, this one I'm gonna say is not great. I know that was a popular one this year as well, but I don't know, I just didn't love it. I thought it was a little bit obvious where it was going, and I didn't get really pulled into the story like other people have. The Wishing Pool is an anthology of short stories from Tananarive, and I'm gonna say really great. This is probably one of the most successful anthologies I've ever read in terms of ratings. It's really hard to get a lot of high ratings in an anthology, but this one was mostly 3 stars and above. I had numerous 4 stars. I think I had multiple 5 stars. I really enjoy her writing. I really need to keep reading more from her. I think that was really great. Halloween Fiend was pretty good for a Halloween novella. I'm just gonna say okay, good, fine though. It has a lot of atmosphere to it. It is about the personification of Halloween, basically being this monster that haunts this town. Really good Halloween read. Not really great any other time of the year though. Ring Shout, I'm gonna put that in okay, good, fine. I think I gave it a 3.5-star rating, and overall I felt like the book was stronger in concept than execution for me, but I think that's because it was a very plot-driven book and I wanted more of the characters. I'm a very character-driven reader, so I wanted to dig into them a little bit more, but it had an interesting concept of just how hatred can infect people, and I know it's a really popular, well-loved one, so if you're interested in it, still check it out. The Horror is a book that really had potential to be really great for me, but I'm gonna say okay, good, fine, because I gave it a 3.5. I do felt like it struggled a little bit with knowing what it wanted to be. It has an interesting concept, but it just felt like several different things at times. Like sometimes it felt more grief heavy, sometimes it felt more gruesome and silly a little bit, so it didn't fully come together for me, but I did like it. It was very atmospheric. I'm not eagerly looking to read more of David Sodergren, that author, but I would maybe pick up something else from him in the future. Boys in the Valley, I feel like I have to say I actively disliked. I think I gave it a 2-star. This one was just really supernatural, and it's a story about evil possessing this boys' orphanage, and it just wasn't for me. It wasn't a bad book, it just wasn't for me. I do think Philip Fracassi is a talented writer, but that one was not my style. Model Home, I am going to say not memorable, not great. I did just read this book, so that's why it's memorable to me right now, but I don't see it being memorable for a very long time. There were moments that I liked it, but it's a very high concept book. It's very conceptual. The writing style of it is very, not stream of consciousness, but it feels like you're very trapped in someone's trauma while you're reading the book, which is effective, but doesn't make for the most memorable reading experience. And I didn't fully love it and how it wrapped up, the direction it was going. I have read from River Solomon before. I think I prefer when they're fully leaning into fantasy. I think that works better for me with their writing style. This one, not so much. And So Thirsty, I also recently read this, and it was my first Rachel Harrison, and I thought it was really great. It kind of feels similar to like Diavola's writing style in the type of horror that it was. It's really a story more about female friendship, but it's about these 2 women who are going on this trip, and then they encounter some vampires, and then their life gets kind of crazy. I had so much fun with it, and there were so many things that felt very relatable to it. It feels like the type of book that I really wish my best friend was a reader so that she would read it too, and then we could have conversations about it. Like, it feels like something you just want to read by the pool with your best friend and just talk about female friendship and have a good time with. I really liked it. I gave it a 4, not quite a 5, and I will definitely be reading more Rachel Harrison now. So that's it for all the horror books I read this year. A lot smaller of a picture than the mystery thriller category was for me. I just wasn't gravitating to it as much this year. It just wasn't my year. That's why I didn't do a prediction video for the horror category, the Goodreads Choice Awards, because I just didn't feel like I was really keeping up with horror the same amount that I have in the past. I mean, reading over 30 books is still like a lot in a category, but it just wasn't my favorite thing this year. I was really just enjoying lighter things, especially mysteries. Maybe that'll change next year. Maybe it was just the books that were coming out didn't seem as interesting to me. I don't know. But anyway, this was it. These were my favorites. This is what I liked, and these are what I didn't love. Like I mentioned, if you want to hear more about some of the books that I called out being book club selections, I'll have those videos linked down below so you can check that out. And while you're down there, if you are not already and you want to subscribe or hit the notification bell so you can be notified when I post, you could definitely do that too. There are still more videos to come in this end of year video series where I'm talking about different ways to wrap up my reading. I have a video coming soon about the most unique books I read this year. I'm going to talk about the best books I read this year. I'm going to try to whittle down my #1 favorite book of the year, all the fun things I usually do. So a lot of that is still coming soon. But for now, that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.